Coming up on a newscast, President Yoon discussed ways to boost the biohealth industry with experts. This comes at an emergency economic meeting centered on supporting development of local vaccines and cutting red tape. South Korea and Poland secured a framework agreement. Various Korean weapon systems, including the Fa-50 fighters, are involved. Indonesian President Joko Widodo arrived in Seoul. He will hold a summit with the South Korean leader on Thursday with a focus on defense projects and the economy. Hello and welcome, I'm Daniel Chen. Let's begin with our top story. President Yoon held this weekly emergency economic meeting. Developing the biohealth industry into one of South Korea's key strategic sectors was the focal point of the session. Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
South Korea will nurture its biohealth sector to develop it into one of the nation's core strategic industries. That's President Yoon as he toured the Healthcare Innovation Park at Seoul National University Pundang Hospital just south of Seoul on Wednesday.
정부는 바이오헬스 산업을 국가 핵심 전략 산업으로 육성할 계획을 가지고 있습니다. K-바이오 백신 펀드를 조성하는 등 금융 지원 역시 확대해서 기업들이 블록버스터 신약과 백신 개발에 전념할 수 있도록 지원하겠습니다.
That will require cutting red tape to speed up approvals for AI-applied and digitally innovative medical devices.
바이오 헬스 분야의 신산업 영역의 규제 혁신 방향을 우선 제시해서 시장에서 예측 가능성을 높이고 혁신적인 기술이 상용화될 수 있도록 지원하겠습니다.
The president's top economic aide said Yoon called for the need of biohealth clusters similar to the biotech hub in the greater Boston area.
The government plans to focus on fostering biohealth infrastructure, including regulatory innovation, raising manpower, and supporting R&D. We will provide support in finance, tax, location, and licensing to ensure private investment worth 13 trillion Korean won implemented as planned.
Greater Boston is home to more than 1,000 biotechnology companies ranging from small startups to billion-dollar pharmaceutical firms, and its proximity to leading academic institutions give the region a large network of scientists and access to generous public and private funding. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
SK Group's chair pledged new investments of some $22 billion in the U.S. in major high-tech sectors. The announcement followed a virtual meeting with President Joe Biden, who called the deal historic. Shin Se-byuk fills us in.
South Korea's second-largest conglomerate, SK Group, on Tuesday unveiled an ambitious plan to inject billions of dollars in new investments in the United States and major industries, including chip production.
Today, we are announcing another $22 billion in new investment in the U.S., so including the major investment in semiconductor, the EV batteries, and biotechnology.
President Biden welcomed the announcement and called the investment historic, adding that it showcases that the U.S. is back to working with its allies. That, of course, includes South Korea.
Thank you for this historic announcement. This path-breaking announcement represents clear evidence that the United States, Korea, and its allies are back and winning the technology competition of the 21st century.
The remarks followed a virtual meeting between President Biden and SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won on Tuesday U.S. time, where they discussed boosting foreign investment in the U.S., especially in the chip industry, an area that has been at the center of Biden's policy agenda. The $22 billion announced on the day is part of a $52 billion package that the SK chairman said last year it planned to invest in the U.S. through 2030. Broken down by industry, of the $22 billion, $15 billion will go solely into the semiconductors, $5 billion will be invested in green energy businesses such as battery development, with the remainder for biotechnologies. Biden said with the latest investment plans in place, the U.S. can expect to add as many as 20,000 new jobs by 2025. Tuesday's announcement comes on top of the group's $7 billion investment plan made in May for new EV battery production facilities in the U.S. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Poland secured a framework agreement on purchasing South Korean weapons systems. This includes buying 48 FA-50s, 980 K2 Black Panther tanks, and 648 K9 self-propelled howitzers. At the signing ceremony in Poland on Wednesday, local time, the country's defense chief said Poland needs to replace equipment it donated to Ukraine, and Korean weapon systems were the right fit. Although the value of the deal is not yet confirmed, it's expected to be Seoul's single biggest weapons export pact to date. South Korea's possible participation in Chip 4, also referred to as Fab 4, is not to ostracize a certain country. Instead, it will be in consideration of Seoul's national interest. That's according to the nation's top diplomat on Wednesday, speaking at the Seoul Foreign Correspondents' Club conference. Park Jin explained it would be best to move forward in a direction that benefits related countries. He also mentioned that if there are misunderstandings from China, diplomatic efforts should be made. Washington also suggested that Japan and Taiwan join the U.S.-led Chip alliance. The Chinese government urged South Korea to maintain the Moon administration's policy on THAAD. The country's foreign ministry spokesperson emphasized that new leadership code can turn a blind eye to past debts and urged Seoul to act with prudence in regards to the issue. The policy involves the so-called 3 no's: no additional THAAD deployment, no South Korean participation in the U.S. missile defense program, and no involvement in a trilateral military alliance with Washington and Tokyo. Zhao Lijian's statement was in regard to the South Korean foreign minister's comment on Monday that the 3-no policy was not a formal promise nor an agreement with China, but rather an expression of South Korea's stance. At the National Assembly, lawmakers grilled government officials from the education, culture, and social sector. Main topics included the new police bureau and whether the latest COVID-19 measures are working. Kim Bo-kyung has more from day 3 of the interpellation session.
Day 3 of the National Assembly interpellation focused on social issues and the education and culture sectors. There was fierce debate on the Interior Ministry's new police bureau. The enforcement decree was passed on Tuesday, allowing the ministry to have more control over the police, including any personnel appointments. Addressing concerns that it will hinder police neutrality, Interior Minister Lee Sang-min said the aim is to improve transparency, as before the work had been done by the now-defunct Senior Presidential Secretary for Civil Affairs Office. And regarding concerns over the minister having direct investigative control over the police, he said that will not happen.
This is why more than 80% of the bureau will be made up of current police officers. They will handle the work by themselves. If I do anything that's outside the boundary of the authority that I promised, it would become a problem right away.
Another hotly debated topic was tackling COVID-19. Lawmakers asked whether the Yoon administration's science-based measures are working and whether reducing financial support for those infected is the right thing to do. South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said that the situation the country is facing is better with vaccines and medicines, and that the funds should be used when the situation gets worse.
If people get vaccinated and adhere to personal hygiene measures, experts say it is unlikely that things will become aggravated. Financial aid is being reduced at a time when the situation is stabilized, to save funds for later use if it worsens.
The head of the Education Ministry, who was appointed without a parliamentary confirmation process, was grilled not only on certain personal issues, but also on the plans to nurture 150,000 new experts in the semiconductor industry. The government plans to do this by easing student quotas at universities regardless of region, which has sparked a backlash from universities outside the Greater Seoul area, worried that with eased quotas, they will get fewer students. The very first interpellation session since Yoon administration took office ended on Wednesday after 3 days of questioning. Though some hot topics were addressed, controversial issues will be debated further by parliamentary committees. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
A special presidential task force aimed at achieving national unity is launched. It's in tune with one of key values President Yoon has been emphasizing since the election. Heading the team is Kim Han-gil, who had also chaired a committee on national unity during the transition period. At the launching ceremony, the South Korean leader emphasized that universal values are key to uniting people who have different beliefs.
통합은 가치의 공유를 전제로 이루어지는 것입니다. 자유, 인권, 법치, 연대라는 보편적 가치가 통합의 밑거름이라고 생각합니다.
The committee will consist of 24 civilian experts from various fields. They will aid the president in drawing up effective ways to prevent and resolve social conflicts that stem from regionalism, gender and income inequality, among other issues. This will be first presidential committee ordained by Yoon. President Joko Widodo is visiting Seoul. A summit is planned for Thursday. One issue to be hashed out is Indonesia's share of cost in the project to develop KF-21 fighters, which has not been paid. During Widodo's two-day visit, he will also meet with Hyundai Motor Group Chair Chung Il-sun, as well as business leaders from other companies including Samsung, SK, and LG. His trip to Seoul is part of a regional tour to 3 countries, the others being China and Japan. Victoria Nuland, the U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, held a meeting with senior South Korean officials. They mainly held discussions on several regional and global issues, including North Korea. Min Suk-hyun has the details.
The U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland, who now is in Seoul, met with First Vice Foreign Minister Cho Hyun-dong on Wednesday. The two discussed a wide range of issues, including the security situation on the Korean peninsula. Both sides shared the view that North Korea's nuclear missile threats remain an urgent task that needs to be dealt with. With that in mind, they agreed to keep the door open for dialogue with Pyongyang and carry out a flexible approach in their diplomacy with the regime. But in the event of a North Korean provocation, they plan to work closely to ensure a strong, unified response from the international community. On the Seoul-Washington alliance, Cho and Nuland hope to swiftly hold their extended deterrence dialogue and agree to work on what they call their new Global Comprehensive Strategic Alliance. The two sides also agreed to expand cooperation on key issues such as global supply chains and climate change. Later in the day, Nuland also met with Seoul's top nuclear envoy, Kim Gun, to discuss plans for North Korea's denuclearization. At their meeting, the two are expected to have discussed South Korea's bold plans, which includes economic incentives in line with North's efforts to denuclearize. The senior U.S. diplomat arrived in Seoul on Tuesday for a 3-day trip after shortly visiting Tokyo early this week. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
An annual memorial service to honor the sacrifices and contributions of the UN forces during the Korean War was held here in the nation. The U.S. also observes a memorial service for the occasion and will unveil a remembrance wall in Washington. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
South Korea is technically still at war with North Korea, with a permanent peace treaty having never been signed. Only an armistice agreement on July 27, 1953, giving any semblance of peace. Every year on that day, South Korea honors the UN forces who fought alongside the country during the 3-year war. And this year, the South Korean government celebrated UN Forces Participation Day under the theme of We Go Together. It's a message that goes out to the 22 countries that took part in what was the first attempt at collective security under the UN system to restore peace on the Korean peninsula.
We would not be able to talk about South Korea today if it were not for the UN sacrifice. Each Korean who enjoys freedom and prosperity today is indebted to 1,950,000 UN soldiers.
July 27th is also designated as National Korean War Veterans Armistice Day in the U.S., which led the UN forces and suffered the most casualties. And this year, a remembrance wall in Washington, D.C. will be unveiled with the names of some 43,000 soldiers who died in the war inscribed on it. Defense ministers from both South Korea and the U.S. are set to attend the grand opening ceremony. South Korean President Yoon showed his appreciation for the wall in a social media post, adding that Seoul will continue upholding an ironclad alliance with Washington. Lee Young-eun, Arirang News.
Nearly 7 decades ago, the armistice that ended active combat in the Korean War was signed. It brought peace, but most people with family on the other side at the time would never see their loved ones again. Even today, those who defect to the South find themselves in the same situation. Kim Hyun-sung has the full story.
69 years ago, the war-torn peninsula came to an agreement to put the war on pause and to cease all hostilities. But that peace meant separation, for the North and South remained divided along the Korean demarcation line with no promise of when the war would finally end. And that peace brought pain for families split between North and South. 86-year-old Chang Chun-hee comes from Pyeongnam-do province in North Korea.
전쟁이 없었다면 아버지하고 오빠하고 정말 행복하게 살았겠죠. 전쟁이 없었다면.
In the frenzy of the Korean War, she lost touch with her family, but for years she held on to the same hope.
저는 항상 저의 아버지를 만날 수 있을 거다는 그 희망을 갖고 살았어요. 김포공항에서 만나는 그런 상상을 늘 하면서 소설 속의 주인공이 됐어요, 항상. 꼭 만날 거라는 그런 기대를 가지고 여태까지 살았던 거예요.
Chang Chun-hee still keeps decades-old letters, articles, and pictures that show a glimpse of her father's life. There are thousands of tragic stories like hers. More than 133,000 people in South Korea are registered as a member of a separated family. More than 2/3 of them have passed away. Heo Young-chul defected to South Korea 20 years ago. Here, he settled down to a new life as a film director. He says that he had no other choice but to escape North Korea in order to live. But he lives with the pain of leaving his family behind.
보고 싶은 마음만 간절한데 하도 간절하니까 그래서 내 마비가 온 것 같아.
According to Korea Hana Foundation, the biggest reason that defectors are unhappy with their lives here is because they have to live apart from their families. Director Heo Young-chul is currently developing a virtual reality program where separated families can once again meet their loved ones in the north.
정말 몇십 년 동안 못 보잖아. 앞으로도 영원히 못 볼 수 있어. 그러면 그들이 사진 한 쪽이라도 가져오면 우리가 그걸 재현해서 가상 프로그램에서 만들 수 있는 이런 것도 좀 하려고 하거든요.
The war was put on hold 69 years ago, but the pain still ripples through the decades. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, the EU approved a proposal to voluntarily cut its gas usage to reduce energy dependence on Russia. The White House dispatched its presidential coordinator for global energy to Europe. Lee Shi-woo has the latest.
On Tuesday, European Union energy ministers approved a proposal for all EU countries to voluntarily cut gas use by 15% from August until March 2023. That is, to reduce its dependence on Russian energy supplies.
The impact on the GDP will be significantly smaller if we start saving now and don't wait until Russia forces us to do so.
The approved proposal is a lighter version of the one previously put forward by the Commission. The initial plan involved imposing a binding 15% cut on every country, but the current agreement includes exemptions for certain countries and industries depending on certain factors such as the amount of energy stored and their energy needs. The agreement comes after Russia's state-owned gas company Gazprom on Monday said it would cut the supply through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Germany in half to just 20% of its capacity. Gazprom has blamed the reductions on repairs to the pipeline, but some EU and US officials have said the move was a retaliation to Western sanctions against Russia. In response to the turmoil, according to CNN, the White House dispatched Presidential Coordinator for Global Energy Amos Hochstein to Europe on Tuesday. He will travel to Paris and Brussels to discuss contingency planning with the US-EU Energy Task Force that was created in March. Meanwhile, also according to CNN on Tuesday, a spokesperson for the UN Secretary General said that the first shipment of Ukrainian grain under the Black Sea deal, brokered by the UN and Turkey, is expected to move within a few days. Through the deal, grain exports are able to resume from 3 Ukrainian ports. This comes despite Russian strikes on the Ukrainian port of Odessa just a day after the agreement was reached. Turkey's Ministry of Defense also announced on Tuesday the opening of what's called a Joint Coordination Center for Ukrainian grain exports. The center is to oversee the transport of vital grain exports out of Ukraine. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Elsewhere around the world, magnitude 7.1 earthquake hit the northern Philippine island of Luzon early Wednesday. According to the country's Interior Ministry, at least 4 people have died and 60 have been injured. More than 170 buildings, including a hospital, were damaged. Tremors were reportedly felt in the capital more than 300 kilometers away. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. ordered an immediate deployment of rescue and relief staff. He'll also be flying to the affected area to meet with the victims and local officials. The Philippines is prone to earthquakes because of its location on the seismically active Ring of Fire, a band of volcanoes and fault lines around the Pacific Ocean. Data for the month of May shows there were more deaths than births in South Korea. Fewer babies were born than in any May on record, while deaths were at an all-time high for that month. Experts say the government must look for new ways to address the issue. Lee Hyun zooms in on this concerning development.
It seems demographic challenges here in South Korea are still unsettled. A report released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday shows that there were 20,007 newborns in May, down 8.8% from a year earlier. It marked the lowest figure for any May since relevant data was first compiled in 1981 and is also the lowest figure in 74 months. And it's also the 78th consecutive month of on-year decline. This comes as the number of women in their 20s and 30s, the average age at which women give birth in South Korea, is decreasing. Meanwhile, the number of deaths increased by 12.8% on year to 28,859, also the highest for any month of May. A spokesperson for Statistics Korea said the latest figures are largely due to an increase in the number of older people in the country.
Clearly, as the number of older people increases, this is contributing to a rise in the number of deaths. And just like it was back in March and April, COVID-19 is a threat to older people and leads to a high death rate.
The number of deaths has been exceeding births for 31 consecutive months now. One expert says there should be different approaches to deal with this matter.
Even though the policies have not been very successful in the past, we should still try having more daycare centers, more places where parents can safely put their kids during working hours so parents can go and find and do work. And secondly, the Korean approach has been to try to protect the jobs of women who take time off to have babies. I'm not sure if this is a good strategy. I think that keeps firms from hiring qualified female workers. So instead of the traditional approach of protecting women, having a more flexible labor market may actually be better for pregnant female workers.
Meanwhile, the number of marriages rose 5.5% in May compared to the same period last year, the figure standing at 17,041. Analysts say this is due to weddings that had previously been postponed because of COVID-19. However, the official says the number of weddings in May is still the second lowest number since data was first compiled. Lee Hyun, Arirang News.
Seoul has partnered with Arirang Group to help people in need. The company, known for healthcare products and cosmetics, put together a package of approximately $4.1 million worth of daily necessities like detergent, soap, and shampoo. The city will distribute the supplies to welfare centers and low-income families within next year. This is the largest donation Arirang Group has made to vulnerable people since the program started 10 years ago.
Most parts of the country are currently under heat wave alerts. The pattern of daytime heat and tropical nights will continue tomorrow. Lows in Seoul will be warm for the next couple of days with readings near 25 degrees Celsius or higher. Tomorrow, the subtropical high-pressure system, which is creating a big heat dome, will push temperatures to near 33 degrees Celsius. Under such extreme heat, it will be important to take extra precautions against heat-related illnesses. Wearing light-colored and loose-fitting garments would be helpful, and limiting your time outdoors when it's less hot, like in the early morning hours, will be recommended. Keep in mind that UV radiation will be strong tomorrow, so if you have to head outside, make sure to wear plenty of sunblock. Most regions will be under cloudy skies for the morning. Seoul will be starting off at 25 degrees. Daily highs in Daejeon and Gwangju will reach 33. Daegu and Gyeongju will be hot at 32 degrees. The capital region will see scattered outbreaks of rain on Friday. Jeju Island will see long spells of showers next week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.